In the first week of April 2026, something happened that Microsoft really does not want you talking about. A routine Windows 11 cumulative update pushed out through the normal automatic update pipeline bricked an estimated 14 million personal computers across North America and Europe. Blue screen loops, boot failures. Some machines went into recovery mode and could not get out. Some refused to even load a recovery console. Entire businesses lost a full working day. Hospitals delayed non-critical appointments. Banks reverted to manual processes at call centers. And somewhere in the quiet corner of the internet, millions of Linux users turned on their computers, worked through their day, and never knew anything had happened. This is not an attack on Microsoft for the sake of it. This is the story of a specific failure with a specific cause and a specific lesson. Because what happened in April 2026 is not going to be the last time. It is going to be a template. Let me walk you through what actually happened. The update in question, tracked internally as a security rollup, contained a change to how Windows 11 handles a low-level driver signing verification routine. The change was intended to close a security gap that had been disclosed responsibly by an academic research team at the Technical University of Munich earlier in the year. The underlying vulnerability was legitimate. The fix was overdue. But in the process of deploying the fix, Microsoft's engineers modified a check that, for a subset of machines with specific motherboard firmware versions, caused the operating system to misidentify legitimate system drivers as tampered. On boot, those machines would load the kernel, begin the driver initialization sequence, encounter a driver that now appeared invalid, and throw a system integrity fault. The result was a blue screen, a reboot, another blue screen, an infinite loop. The machines most affected were desktops and laptops manufactured. Between 2019 and 2022, with certain popular motherboard chipsets, enterprise fleets running standardized hardware were hit hardest. Dell, HP, and Lenovo all issued advisories within 48 hours. Microsoft issued a partial rollback within 72 hours. For machines that had not yet installed the update, Microsoft paused distribution. For machines already in the boot loop, Microsoft's advice was to boot into recovery mode, run a specific command line sequence to remove the update, and reboot. If the machine could not reach recovery mode, which a non-trivial number of affected machines could not, the advice became, contact your hardware vendor. This was not a sophisticated attack. This was not a supply chain compromise. This was, as Microsoft eventually acknowledged in a blog post written by its engineering leadership, a regression in an internal code path that was not caught by the company's automated testing. In plainer English, the update broke things because the test coverage was inadequate, and the breakage was not detected before rollout. The cost, conservatively estimated by industry analysts at Gartner and IDC and follow-up reports, was somewhere between $1.8 and $3 billion in lost productivity, IT staff overtime, and indirect downstream effects on businesses that depend on computers to operate. That is a lot of money. It is also very hard to make visible because the cost is spread across millions of small pains, not concentrated in any single dramatic event. Now, the inevitable question, why were Linux users unaffected? The glib answer is that Linux users do not run Windows. The more interesting answer is that the Linux update model is architecturally different from Windows in ways that matter. On Linux, updates are not pushed to your machine without your involvement. They are staged, downloaded, and then applied when you tell them to apply. On most Linux distributions, the default configuration either prompts you before installing updates or runs them quietly at your explicit schedule. You have control, you can roll back, you can choose to delay, you can run a specific long-term support release, an LTS, that receives only security critical patches and no feature changes for 5 or even 10 years. That stability is the entire reason why Linux dominates servers. When you need a machine to stay up and not surprise you, Linux's update model is designed around that promise. On top of that, Linux updates are tested differently. Most major distributions push updates through a cascade of channels. A package update goes first into testing, then into staging, then into stable. Users who want absolute reliability run stable. Users who want new features and are willing to tolerate occasional breakage run testing. Power users sometimes run the unstable channel, which is where the action happens. That tiered system means that by the time a change reaches a casual user's machine, it has been run by tens of thousands of more adventurous users first. Bugs are caught. Regressions are flagged. The pain is distributed. Windows does not have that. Windows has insider builds, which is Microsoft's version of a testing channel, but the insider program is a tiny fraction of the user base compared to the testing channels of major Linux distributions. And critically, most Windows Home users are not in the insider program. They're on the main production channel, where updates are pushed automatically. At times Microsoft chooses, with almost no meaningful way for a non-technical user to delay or opt out. The difference in philosophy here is enormous. Windows treats the user as someone who should not have to think about updates. Linux treats the user as someone who has the right to decide when and how. Both philosophies have defensible arguments, but when updates break, those philosophies produce very different outcomes. Windows users wake up to a bricked machine. Linux users never downloaded the bad update in the first place. There is another factor, which is that Linux hardware compatibility has, for most of its history, been its biggest weakness. This is somewhat ironic. Linux can be finicky about drivers, especially on laptops with unusual hardware. But that same caution, the cultural aversion to automatic driver updates, means that Linux systems almost never break because of a bad driver rollout. The system you installed is the system you have. Updates to the kernel, where drivers live, are opt-in, can be rolled back with a single command, and are published well in advance. Windows, by contrast, ships driver updates through Windows Update automatically. For most users, this is convenient. Your printer works without you ever thinking about it. Your graphics card gets the latest game-ready drivers without you visiting a website. But that convenience comes with a failure mode. When Microsoft or a driver vendor pushes a bad update, it lands on your machine without your consent. And you find out there was a problem only when you turn the computer on the next morning. Let me zoom out. This is not a video about Linux evangelism. I'm not going to tell you that you should switch operating systems because of one bad update. What I am going to tell you is that April 2026 is a case study in how the trade-offs of different computing platforms manifest in the real world. Most of the time, Windows users get the benefit of automatic, seamless updates. Most of the time, Linux users get the benefit of tight control over their systems. Most of the time, the trade-off is invisible. Every so often, an update breaks, and the invisible trade-off becomes very visible, very fast. The question worth asking is whether the trade-off still makes sense for you personally. If you run a home machine for email and browsing, automatic updates are probably still fine, because when they break, you lose an afternoon. If you run a small business where computer downtime costs you money by the hour, the automatic update model starts to look expensive. If you run mission-critical infrastructure, you already run Linux or some heavily managed Windows variant with WSUS, because the consumer Windows update model is not built for your use case. For home users who want some protection from this failure mode without switching operating systems, there are things you can do. Open Windows Update settings and pause updates for up to 5 weeks. Use that 5-week window to check the tech press for reports of any problems with the current update cycle before you let it install. If you are on Windows 11 Pro, you can set the active hours and deferral policies more aggressively, holding feature updates for months. If you are using Windows 11 Home, those controls are more limited, which is itself an editorial choice by Microsoft. The Home Edition is the edition most vulnerable to the exact failure mode we are discussing, and the Home Edition is the one with the fewest tools to mitigate it. You can also keep good backups. This is banal advice, but it is advice most people do not follow until something breaks. If your important data is on a second drive, an external drive, or a cloud backup, a bricked operating system is an inconvenience. If it is not, a bricked operating system can be a catastrophe. Windows file history, included free, is better than nothing. A rotating pair of external drives with something like Macrium Reflect is better still. An off-site backup with a service like Backblaze is the belt and suspenders approach. Now, the uncomfortable part. Every big Windows update breakage leads to a conversation that goes nowhere. Tech journalists write about it, Microsoft apologizes, the community vents for a week, and then everyone moves on, and the fundamental architecture that made the breakage possible stays in place, because changing it would mean changing Windows itself in ways Microsoft is not willing to change. And so the cycle repeats every 18 to 24 months. This was not the first time a Windows update has broken millions of machines, and it will not be the last. The pattern is predictable enough that you can almost mark it on a calendar. If any of that strikes you as unacceptable, if you find yourself wondering whether a different relationship with your operating system is possible, that curiosity is the starting point. You do not need to abandon Windows overnight. You can install a Linux distribution on an old machine, use it for web browsing and email for a few months, and decide for yourself whether the model is the right fit for you. Ubuntu, Linux Mint, and Fedora are all reasonable starting points. Each has a live USB option, which means you can try the operating system without installing anything, or do not. Stay on Windows. Pause your updates. Keep your backups. Understand the trade-off. None of these choices are wrong. The only wrong choice is making them unconsciously. The April 2026 update event will, in all likelihood, be forgotten by the time you watch this, buried by whatever the tech press is talking about next month. That is how these things go. But the pattern underneath it will not be forgotten, because the pattern is baked into the architecture of how we chose to build consumer operating systems. Understanding the pattern is more valuable than remembering any one instance of it. If you found this useful, subscribe, because next we're going to look at what a Linux first small business looks like, including the specific friction points that make the transition real and the specific tools that mitigate them. And in the comments, I want to hear from anyone whose machine got caught up in the April event. I want to hear how you recovered, what it cost you, and whether it changed how you think about your computer. Because these stories, when people share them, are the only way the rest of us learn.